Welcome to the Zero Input Agriculture podcast. Today, I'm talking to Richard Goerwitz. Did I pronounce that correctly? One of these days I'm going to make sure I
It's
get that right in
it's
advance.
Gerwitz. It's fine. I
Okay,
mean, it's yeah, Gerwitz is how I pronounce it, but it is the spelling's a little bit strange. So
a little bit German, maybe?
yeah, it is German originally.
Okay, so Richard, tell me a bit about your background and the path that led you into crop breeding and lower input agriculture.
Well, I mean, plants have always been an interest to me. I mean, ever since I was a kid, really. I remember like a time when I was growing up, growing some plants and pots in a windowsill when my family just lived in a little apartment and then they moved to like a small house, a small yard, and like was able to grow a few things in a limited space they let me. And so, then took off later. And then, I also just had developed it kind of evolved into learning about permaculture later, and having interest in the state of the land and the state of figuring out more and more the stuff that's going on, and just you know how a lot of these things tie in together. And so yeah, I mean, I eventually got into the intentional communities movement, and kind of through my interest in permaculture and working with the land. And I've been to a number of them over the years. So where I live is the East Wind community. It's a community in the Ozarks of Missouri, and it's been around since 1974. I have been a member since 2008, and there is when it's sometimes as many as 70 people that live here. It's less than 50 right now. It kind of goes up and down various reasons, but yeah. So I have spent I've also spent some time at other both intentional communities and just permaculture farms and projects and stuff that kind of have temporary communities host woofers, interns, stuff like that for a bit. So I've never been anywhere else for nearly as much time as I have at Eastwind, but I've done a decent amount of traveling and exploring other things going on in similar scenes. So yeah, I
This
mean,
is why I was so interested to talk to you because you have substantial first-hand experience with an intentional community, which is one of the many social experiments that have been tried and to some degree perfected in response to all of the challenges that we're facing. That plant breeding and permaculture and low input agriculture, I mean, it's all part of the same cultural package. So yeah, I'm very, very grateful that I get a chance to talk to you because you're one in a million. So
thanks.
do you want to start by telling me a bit about the crop breeding work you're doing? So you could kind of lay the groundwork about the kind of space that you're managing and the crops that you're working on.
So I am garden manager at Eastwind, and I've been garden manager for most of the time since 2009. I've had a variety of co-managers and other people who helped to various degrees. There was a couple years back, like 10 years ago, that I took good portions of them on leave, and the friend who was co-managing at the time managed then. But but I've been garden manager for the majority of that time. And the seeds and the breeding and seed saving has mostly come in later. A little bit of it came in earlier. Like I have a corn project that I keep trying to remember was 2010 or 2011. It was one of those years that started it, and that's the thing I've been saving seed from the longest. Most of the seed saving has come in since about like 2018, 2019 or so. Like it was always something I did a little bit now and then before, and it was always something I wanted to do more of. And I had read books like some of Carol Depp's books, like The Resilient Gardener and Breed Your Own Vegetable Varieties back, over 10 years ago. Eventually it just got to a point where it's like, okay, if I'm going to be doing this, I should start doing this now, hoping before like, oh, I'll do more seed saving when I get more consistent help and stuff like that. But eventually it's just like no time like the present got start doing it. And I actually had come across Joseph Lofthouse before. I mean, I didn't know his book didn't come out till I think 2021, and when it did come out, I got it, and that really expanded the things I've been doing as far as seed saving since then. But I'd come across some of the stuff he posted on Permies.com before that. And so, it had some idea of like some of the landrace gardening things. And that was really a big inspiration because, then I like growing a lot of variety of stuff. And that was one of my things that inhibited before, like me saving too many seeds, because I'm just like, if I want to try to keep these things pure or whatever, I won't be able to grow as much variety of different varieties in the crops as I want to, because just nice to have all that diversity. But then once I learned more about the landrace breeding style, I'm like, this can work great with what I'm doing. So I've gradually been doing more and more crops, seed saving for more and more. Started like been like 5 or 6 years for started another corn project and saving melons, both cantaloupes and watermelons, and saving okra a bit later, saving winter squash is one of the earlier ones too. And yeah, then after Joseph Lofthouse book, we started saving some sweet peppers and tomatoes and peanuts and other legumes. And another thing I've been doing is chestnut trees. Of course, that's a lot fewer generations of them, but I still have. I started planting them back around the 2010 time frame, and then some of them started producing, just started taking some of the seeds from some of the ones that I liked and starting more trees from them, growing them a year in a garden bed, and then transplanting them out when they're dormant into other spots. And then I actually gotten some of those second generation to be producing nuts too. So I haven't done too much work with seed saving with perennials and trees, because I thought it is a much bigger undertaking that way and longer term project. But I mean, chestnuts, I like eating them a lot, but they're also just being a staple food that can grow on a tree like that has always been an interest of mine. And then just like how much variety there is within the chestnut genus, that like all these species that can cross and all the different traits, and there's so much to work with. So that's one that's a thing too.
But before we jump
I
into
suppose,
talking about individual crops, I'm really interested to get your perspective on changing your management style from that heirloom conservancy to land racing of like just mixing it up and then breeding. Are there any particular advantages that stand out? Because I'm trying to sell the idea of doing landrace gardening to more people out there.
well, for me, I mean, of course, I'm in a different situation than the vast majority of people. So I guess I should talk about a little bit more about this, how it works with the community, because that will give some context to
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
me
go for
talking
it.
about that.
Yeah.
So, like, if basically what we grow is for ourselves. The community is supported financially by other businesses, mostly Eastwind Nut Butters, which is more of a processing facility, which brings in nuts and processes them and sells them. So, what we are growing, the crops and the animals, I don't have to do much with the animals myself. We do have animals too. Those are mostly managed by other people. But yeah, so what we are doing agriculturally is for ourselves, which, the amount of people we have, 50 to 70 people, eat a lot of food. We don't grow all the food we eat. We buy a certain amount, but we grow a decent portion of it. I mean, not as much in terms of like staples, although I grow some of them, like the corn and some of the beans. A lot of it's just we have lots of land, so the limitation is on labor,
Yeah.
and I can
Yeah.
get into that more at another time. Like, just how you never know exactly how much help you're going to get with stuff. So I've kind of taken the route with staples, is that I'm just going to try to see what works, and maybe do some selection work. And so if we need to grow more of them at another time, then that
Hmm.
can happen. But
Yep. Yep.
yeah, so but at this point we're not growing a substantial portion of our staple food. But I mean, as far as produce, we're growing a lot of it, especially vegetables, and preserving lots of it for the winter and stuff. I mean, fruit, not cool. Grow some, but it's a little more trickier. I mean, there's certain fruit that does well here, but a lot of your traditional fruit that people want to eat the most is prone to a lot of pests and diseases and stuff. So,
Hmm.
and then other stuff that does better, it's just harder to get eaten. So there's a lot of, what was your original question? I'm trying to think of where I was going
Oh
with
no, you were
all of
just letting
this.
us know the context within which you're working, and I want to highlight that I'm doing much the same thing. So the reality is we live in a world where staple crops are extremely cheap, and it's very
Yeah.
difficult to justify spending, 2 months of everybody's year or more out there picking corn cobs. But on the flip side of that, if we ever needed to be able to do that at scale, we need to have the right genetics for our location, and developing that genetics takes time and attention. So I think I'm in a very
Yeah.
similar situation to you. I'm developing enough of a population of my staple crops to do breeding with them, but I'm not putting that pressure on myself to, prove that I can grow 100% of my own calories, because there's other things I can do with my time, like this podcast, that will have a bigger positive impact.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because, yeah, staple crops are one of the things that interest me the most, just because, we can, I mean, I like the fruits and vegetables and stuff, and we can, but it's, we need the calorie crops to sustain ourselves, and just having calorie crops that are nutrient dense and diverse is just, I mean, I definitely, I mean, I like eating them whenever I do eat our staple. And I eat a decent amount, like, the corn, we make a lot of it into tortillas, and, I use that when we have them around. I eat a lot of them. I mean, as far as the community as a whole, it's a smaller percentage of the food that people eat probably than myself that's grown here. It's still a substantial percentage. But oh yeah, I remember you were asking about the transition from
Oh yeah,
the,
from
the
from
tradition from
heirlooming to
growing
land
lots of
racing.
different varieties to land racing. So
Yeah.
I've done that different for crops generally. I kind of try to ease myself into it. I mean, especially when I first started doing it, it's just like I don't know how well this is actually going to work and how it's well it's going to go over. So, I just started with a portion of it each year because I mean, as a garden manager, my primary priority has to be, growing food the community wants to eat. And, like people generally support my projects and saving seed, especially ones who've been here a few years and see like how the fruition of some of them that, but I mean, that my personal projects can't be, my primary priority so much because, then just the role of the garden manager, is food the community. I, but over time, that can be putting a bit more effort into saving seeds can actually, I think, lower the overall labor with the crop. It just takes a few years for that. And it also, the tricky thing is it makes the labor more specialized because, I mean, I do a lot of it. There are other people who do some of the seed selection too, but I have to work with the person and trust them more. It's easier for to get other people to just harvest or weed something rather than be paying the close attention to be doing some of the seed work. So it is kind of more burden on me to do it, even if it's like the increase in resilience of the crop and yield makes it so often after a few years I don't have to plant as much to get the
Mm.
same yield. And like for instance, watermelons, it used to be just the norm. I mean, I got used to which watermelon varieties did the best here, but still, probably like 1 out of 4 watermelon plants would kind of wilt and die before the they ripened a single melon. And that was just the norm. And then once I started saving seed, it's just, yeah, after a few years that rarely happens with the watermelons anymore. The cantaloupes it still does. It's been a little bit trickier. I mean, I think breeding for resistance to disease is tricky, especially for some of the crops that have major problems with it. But I mean, I can often, after a few years, I feel like grow about plant about 2/3 of the area that I used to and get the same amount of yield, and then
Mm.
plus the flavor.
Hmm.
I mean, as long as you're okay with different ones having different flavors, just selecting ones that taste good, which is a big priority of mine too.
You're
Tends
almost,
to.
if commercial growers have a real problem with selling their produce. If it looks weird, even if it's better, if it's unfamiliar, often customers are reluctant to take a chance on it. And that's why we have like, five varieties of apples that kind of are all you ever see in the shops anymore. But you're in a lucky position because you're producing not just for a small household, but for a large community. Like 50 people is large compared to most households these days. So you've got a really rare opportunity to get the scale of production and the scale of the breeding like all working together. Like I'm really envious of the situation you're in.
Yeah, so like watermelons, for example, I mean, they are one of my favorite things to eat and select from just because there is so much variety in them. And I never know exactly what it's gonna look like in the middle until I cut into it. But I mean, luckily, yeah, most people, I mean, there are times when certain things are just, this grows well and, but people don't really want to eat it. But I mean,
Hmm.
watermelons are pretty popular and people have gotten used to there being a variety. I mean, there was a variety of them before. It was just a variety of different varieties that I bought. And
Mm.
now there's just even more variety because of all the stuff I put in and the seeds I've selected. And, occasionally there's some still watermelon that's not that great. Don't save seed from that
Yeah.
one.
Yeah.
But, when it's good, I'll put out during the peak watermelon season. I just end up because we have community meals generally put out at lunch and dinner, and then but like even other people putting it out just like oh, I'll get the watermelon ready and come in right before it's served and cut up a watermelon, and then we'll know if it's one that's good enough. I put a little tub there to collect seeds, and depending on how good it is, I'll collect more versus fewer. I mean, I try to balance like getting stuff seed from the best versus like having diversity, and so I save some seed from good solid quality ones, even if they're not the best, because who knows, another year with different conditions, they might be the best, or they might have some other trait that could combine with something else and,
Yeah. Yeah.
turn into something really good. So I don't
That
save
was
any
some
seed from,
that was something I wanted to ask. Like, do you get to use the taste buds of the community to help you with the selection process? Because I've heard stories
yeah,
of like professional chili breeders and they end up like with tongue cancer because they're just tasting chilies all day long. It's not a burden that has to be put on just one person.
Yeah, I definitely do. I mean, some things are easier than others. I mean, because the watermelons, like, you're using it and getting the seeds at the same
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
That works. I mean, that's the easy. That sort of crop is the easiest to do in my context. I mean, it's a little bit more tricky with things like cucumbers and summer squash, which I have started saving seed of in the last few years, just because they're prone to a lot of pests and diseases here, and I really want to select for them. But like, I have to save, some aside to grow bigger and mature to get the seeds from.
Mm.
And so, I definitely waited longer to start doing crops like that, just because
Mm.
the easiest things to start with were things that the seed and the food is mature at the same time. And yeah,
Um,
but I mean, the watermelon's different because since the seeds are embedded in the melon, then I kind of got to get enough people. I don't need to get all the seeds, even the best ones. I don't save every single seed, but I try to get the good ones a good portion of the seed. And luckily, enough people generally, if I put that tub there and give reminders, especially when there's a really good one, you want more like this, please put your seeds there. We'll get seeds. I mean, like the cantaloupes is different because I mean, I also save the seed when I put them out, but since I can just scoop the seeds out of the middle and process it, and I just taste them. I definitely get feedback from that. People tell me, "Oh, I really like that melon," and that can influence my decision. But
mm.
I don't have to get if I'm the one putting it out, then I don't have to get other people to remember to set seeds aside. So
Is it
yeah, a lot depends
surprising
on.
how different people's preferences are? Because I'm thinking how rare it is that you actually get an opportunity to get like a diverse selection of a crop and then run that past many different people. Like, are people kind of strange in things that they like and don't like?
Yeah, there's definitely differences. Although I feel like when there's often like the ones that I think are really good, or a lot of people do too, but there's variation. Like watermelons, I mean, just because there is so much variation and because we talk about, how good this melon is so much and compared to like food that needs to be cooked or put in things, and it's not as obvious the differences in the individual ones. The watermelon's one of the ones that's just really obvious. So yeah, there's definitely certain people who like just like the ones that are crispy more, like that are firmer, I should say,
Mm,
and don't like sometimes, not always, but sometimes that correlates with less sweetness. And
hmm
sometimes some of the really sweetest ones are more softer. And some people are like, God, I like the soft ones, and some people like the crispy ones. And I kind of like the ones in the middle to more firm that are also sweet.
So
So,
let's focus
but
on watermelon a bit because it's an exciting crop that not many people do a lot of work on. So, what are your goals when you're breeding your watermelon crop?
so I want a diverse land race. I mean, I want it to be, resilient to our conditions and productive. And I like good sized watermelons. I mean, I know the trend in watermelons and a lot of things has often been for smaller stuff. I think because of, normal families are smaller
Yeah.
sizes or people getting for themselves or a small family. But for my situation, getting good sized ones, although it varies, sometimes it's nice to have some real big ones and some more medium sized ones, but small small produce in general, I'm generally select against because, when you're doing stuff for a lot of people, it's just more annoying to be having to prepare
Yeah.
small versus large. But I mean, there's a balance there too, because if you get something too big, then it's like it's more of a risk. If you lose one, it's worse
Mm,
than, like tomatoes, for example, I don't really do the real big tomatoes just because we have a lot of issues with cracking and rot and stuff. So
hmm
I don't like to do real small tomatoes either because nobody wants to pick them all for the amount we need.
Yeah.
So end up, having trying to get to that sweet spot, the tomatoes in the middle where, you're
You,
not going to have as much losses, but it's still not going to be, that much extra labor with picking just lots more quantity. And
you're breeding
so,
human-sized fruit. That's the goal.
yeah, watermelons. Yeah, asking about my goals in the watermelons. So I like, I don't like the really thick rinded ones because that's just, I mean, I get why, commercial people might because they are just more sturdy, less fragile, less likely to break. I mean, I don't want super thin rind that enough
Mm,
to be like, break at the slightest touch either, but I've definitely some of the genetics that got in are thicker rind. And that's just to me that's just kind of wasted space in our storage space, that much more you have to pick up and move around for the amount you get out of it. So I've selected against the really thicker rind. I mean, I like a variety of different shapes. I mean, long ones, round ones, and of course the color in the interior. I mean, most of them end up being red, pink, various sort. We have a certain amount of yellow ones. I feel like I wonder. I mean, I don't know. I don't generally know too much about like, this genetics, the scientific part of it that way. So these are just guesses based on my experience seeing them. But I wonder if the yellow orange colors are more recessive because I've noticed as I've crossed stuff, it seems like there's a lower percentage of the yellow orange than I started with. So
that's one thing I love about breeding. There will be papers out there of somebody who's like figured out the genetics of watermelon color dominance, but you don't need to know that if you don't want to. If you're interested, you can find
yeah.
it and study up on it, but you can completely ignore it and just enjoy the plants. Have you thought about any of the storage watermelon genetics, which I've heard can be found in the US, but it's not common?
I think I remember hearing about that a while ago. And I mean, that would be something good to consider because yeah, as far as low input systems go, I mean, it is easy when you have just infrastructure around to just do, we have a big walk-in cooler and bring the watermelons up and put them in there and then use them, have people eat the most of them when it's hot anyway. So
Yeah, yeah.
I haven't we could, I mean, I actually have some late season ones now, a few of them. We just had our first two frosts, the last two nights. And so before that, I was just busy, picking lots of frost sensitive stuff. I mean, our main watermelon season is like late July through August and September. But some of the plants, I did two different successional plantings this year. So we were, I've done just one before, and then like we've had so many come in all at once. And even if they can store a few weeks, it's just annoying to have like so many of them take up so much room and stuff. So it worked really well to do two different successions. Could have
Mm.
maybe even do a third one to get ones ripening toward like late September, early October, although then you're more running into the longer you get into October, like possible frost risk, or just, cool enough that the ones later in the season are just not as good tasting overall. Though some of these ones we pulled out have been really good. I harvested just a few that some of the plants that already had their first flush, survived enough to make a second flush of smaller fruits, and it
Mm.
wasn't that many of them, but a few nice little treats at the end of the season. But I guess what I was getting at, you're talking about storage watermelons. Like I've noticed people eat a lot fewer watermelons, lot less amount of watermelon as it gets cooler later into the
Yeah.
season.
Yeah.
So it hasn't been a high priority for me, but it is something that interests me. I mean, if you know more about it.
Well, I mostly work with the jam melons, the citrons, and they're a non-sweet kind of ancestral watermelon, and their fruit can store for like a year. Really
Oh,
high in
nice.
pectins, so you can use them to make jam with other fruits. But yeah, there's been some people trying to get the vigor from the citron melons into modern watermelons to, just play around with that. But like when you're doing selection, you have to have a reason for wanting a particular outcome. And like you said, like watermelon at the moment, I mean, it's like an optimum, isn't it? Like not too thick, not too thin in the rind, not too crisp, not too mushy, and with the timing that works best for the season for that particular crop. And if there's other plants that come in that produce fruit or sweetness in autumn or winter that do a better job, then there's no real payoff for breeding the watermelon to do something different when it's already doing its own thing well right now.
Yeah, and it's just nice to have a lot of variety. I mean, I know personally, I like, even if there's one fruit that I think, some years there's just like one fruit that's like this is my favorite of the season, but I
Mm.
still wouldn't want all of them to be like that one because it's
Yeah.
nice to have all that variety.
Um, how have you done any hand pollination, or was it just a mass variety trial?
It's just let nature do its course that
Yeah.
way. I've thought about it with certain things. I mean, I've realized with saving a few years, especially certain legumes like cowpeas or something that do really well here, it's a good climate for, but I planted a whole bunch of genetics together
Mm.
and it seems like they rarely want to cross on their own. So, just going through some of them, recently and thinking like maybe I should try to learn hand pollination stuff because there are certain traits that I would love to try to mix with them that don't seem to do it so readily on their own.
And it's another one of these, like you were saying in the beginning, if you try and landrace everything at the same time, it's just too, your attention is too scattered. Like you kind of have to pick a focus project or two every season. But once you get through
Yeah.
that initial variety trial and they Grex or you find the time to do hand pollination, you often only have to do it 1 or 2 seasons, and then you've got something new to do selection on the other side. So
Yeah.
I'd really encourage you to learn how to do hand crossing with legumes. I started doing it with sword beans recently, and it took a little bit of fiddling to kind of get a feel for what I was doing, but now I have a hybrid population and I probably won't have to do much hand pollinating ever again. Oh, how did you source your original material for the watermelons?
It's from a whole lot of sources. I mean, more than anything else, there was a lot of varieties that came from Southern Exposure Seed Exchange, which is actually a company run by another intentional community that's out in Virginia, which is ways from here, but it's mostly straight east, very slightly north. So I mean, then the climate is, has its similarities. So, a lot of the stuff from there works well here. And but I get stuff from a variety of different sources. I mean, I got some things from like Baker Creek Seeds has a lot of heirloom stuff and is really near me, although they have a lot of stuff from all over. So just because they're near me doesn't mean that that all this stuff's necessarily adapted here. You know, I learned that a number of years back when I was starting stuff here. There's a cool seed company, which I've actually, sold some seeds. They sell a small number of my seeds that I've worked on for a bit. The company, the Buffalo Seed Company, based
Hmm.
out of Eastern Kansas, and they have, I mean, both more traditional varieties and a number of landrace sort of seeds. And so, yeah, I got some watermelon genetics from them. I'm trying to think. I've definitely gotten some from a few more places, but it's been a whole lot of different varieties and even a few. I mean, one of the Buffalo Seed Company ones is a land grace that they like the people who run the company, like the couple that run that had been breeding for a while, which had a good amount of new genetics in with it. So
I
yeah,
would
there's
I wish I had more time to talk about all the other crops you've been working on. Like I'm sure we could talk for hours, but there's so
yeah
many other things I want to leave time for. But in the end of this section, I always ask people if you could like wave a magic wand and like just create any crop without having to spend, a whole lifetime or thousands of years on it. What would you love to see growing in the world?
well the thing I thought of was a cold hardy avocado, one that could survive in the climate that I have, because it's not close, but you know, yeah, I know there's avocados that can take a certain amount of freezing out there, but where I'm at, during severe winters, we can get cold snaps down sub-zero Fahrenheit. So yeah, I know Celsius that would be like minus 20 or below. So yeah, that's not even close now. But I mean, really, any crop that has a good amount of fat like that is
Mm.
something that interests me. I
Well,
like avocados a
to
lot.
to give you a little bit of hope, I remember seeing an evolutionary study that figured out that oaks were for a long time a tropical species. Like most of the oak diversity in the Americas is in Mexico, in
Hmm.
relatively frost-free locations. And it was only one of the ice sheet retreats where some of those species hybridized and then formed a hybrid swarm that followed the retreating glaciers. So,
Interesting.
yeah, tropical species can turn into very cold tolerant ones when you just get that right mixing up of the genetics. And I believe that there are high altitude avocado relatives through South America. So there might be someone out there in just the right circumstances who could scrape all that material together and make
Yeah.
it happen one day.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. Our climate is a tough. I mean, I don't know. I guess you're gonna talk about the climate stuff in another section, but I can just
Mm,
get into it because you're talking about the stuff from high altitudes in South America. It's like one of the deals with our climate here in Missouri is that it's not so much the average temperatures that are the problem for stuff, it's the extremes because
mm,
we're in the center of North America. And so, I mean, the Ozarks are pretty. I mean, it's an eroded plateau, so there's like rugged terrain in there, but it's not real mountains of any substantial size. So there's nothing to block cold and warm air masses from getting in here. So, we have, especially the colder half of the year, and just like lots of extreme fluctuations. I said how cold it can get, but it can also be 70 degrees in the middle of the winter because you just never know where the air is going to be blowing from. And then in the summer it's hot and humid. I mean, it varies some, not as much, but I mean, we have, average like average high in mid summers in the low 90s, but we get especially if we get drought, we can get temperatures up in the hundreds. And
mm.
so, like, I don't know of any like really as far as perennials go. I mean, annuals are one thing when you only need a season that has a similar climate, but I don't know of any perennials really from the southern hemisphere that do well in a climate like it's like we I don't southern hemisphere having so much more like water and moderation that I think our extremes are just too
It's
much
funny,
for
the,
a
the
lot of
more I
them.
learn about the continental US climate, the less I complain about what we have to deal with in Australia. So let's
Yeah,
move
we
on
have.
into.
I've
Oh,
read a
sorry.
little bit about what you deal with. I think your rainfall extremes are more than here. I mean, we have rainfall extremes too here,
Mm,
and it can dry out. One of the challenges with the land here is the karst. There's the karst topography, so we have a lot of porous bedrock, so like the cave systems and stuff
mm,
around, and there's plenty of water. It's an overall relatively wet climate. We get low mid 40s inches of rain a year, and but it can dry out quickly because the soil doesn't hold on to it super well. I mean,
mm,
it really depends on what spot you are in the landscape, how much soil, what type of soil buildup, what layer of rock is underneath. I mean, it does vary, but
mm,
overall, the land dries out quicker than you would expect with the sort of climate we get, even though there's a lot of water in the deeper water tables, and some of the biggest springs in the world are in the area because you have all these cave systems where all this water from a lot of spots are coming down and then emerging at springs. So you have these spring-fed rivers that have a really, good, consistent cold flow. But then a lot of the smaller water courses on the landscape dry up more easily. So
mm.
that, in terms of like low inputs, is tricky because it just it's good if there's a lot. I mean, if there's a lot of rain, then our ground drains enough that it's less of a problem than some places, although it can still flood the creeks and rivers. But everything we got is like above the floodplain. And so,
Mm.
even we had record flooding in 2017, but, weren't affected too badly by that compared to a lot of other people. But
So
yeah,
tell
that,
tell
that
sorry, tell me a bit more about the area that you're managing, particularly for the annual crops. Like what space and yeah, what kind of management and inputs do you use?
So there's two main garden areas that have annual crops. I mean, also within the same areas, there are some, you know, orchard and perennial stuff, but
Mm,
there's the upper garden and the lower garden. So we are, they're both kind of in a valley in the larger context, but the upper garden's kind of on a low ridge that's within, a valley because it has other higher ridges around it. And the lower garden is a bit down the hill and kind of on a bench where was at one point a floodplain before geologic time passed, before the creek cut down further into the landscape and made the lower floodplain that there is now. So it's nice that we have almost like bottomland like soil in the lower garden, but like not in a actual floodplain. And then
mm,
the upper garden that has been garden space since at least it was expanded over time. I know, some of it longer than others. Some of it's been garden space since I think before East Wind even started because there was right near an old farmhouse that was on the land. Most of it was, expanded into and over the course of time that Eastwind's been going. But where I'm getting with that is it was in garden before I got here. So some of the work of taking rocks out and building soil and stuff was done before that because most of that kind of more ridge area is rocky and still like you go a foot down, you hit, rocky soil. If you're pounding in T-posts in the upper garden, sometimes have to like find several spots until you can get one that goes far enough in to be sturdy because even though the top of the soil is really good, been improved a lot, you get to that rocky stuff not too far down when in the lower garden, especially the lower part of it where we grow a lot of more of the crops that we do have a larger area, you can put the T-posts in much more reliably. But
It,
yeah, so
it's interesting before you
it's
move on, that ability to select the best location for cropping in a wider landscape I think is how a lot of pre-industrial low input agriculture worked. Whereas now you might have a suburban backyard and you don't have that choice. And that's why people often shift into a high input approach because the just the
yeah.
underlying geology that they're stuck with isn't great, but there's nothing else they can do other than bring lots of, topsoil and compost and irrigation in to get something to grow.
Yeah, I guess just since there's so many more people around, then there's just but the best spots are more already taken or expensive to buy. I mean, back in the days when there was a lot lower populations, they could focus their energy on the best land.
Mm.
But yeah,
Does the
I mean,
top and
I
does
have
the
heard.
upper and oh sorry, does the upper and lower garden system help buffer against wet and dry years, that in the upper one will perform better in a wet year and the bottom one in a dry year?
So the I mean, they both the lower garden does retain moisture somewhat more than the upper garden, but in comparison to all the other situations out there, like they both are pretty well draining.
Hmm.
So there are some other spots in the land that there is some heavier clay in a few spots in the land, but that's away from the center of community. We own quite a bit of land, and most of it's wooded, and some of it's in pasture with the animals, and the gardens are closer to community. And so I guess I was gonna what I was gonna say is about the site of stuff. Definitely know I remember reading in some permaculture literature about like saying like, oh, don't plan your garden based on the soil because you can build soil and plan it based on the other factors. But it seems like that is more of the high input mindset, because saying
Mm.
it's like, yeah, I mean, it's one thing, I guess, if the soil is just depleted organic matter and you can build that more easily. I definitely try to build soil and that's great. But like if you have a thin soil over bedrock that's going to dry out really easily, then that's going to make it much harder over the long term to do
And
stuff.
usually the locations that lose that topsoil naturally will lose the soil that you bring in from somewhere else as well. Like you'll be fighting to stop it running down the hill if it's a slope,
Yeah.
for example.
Yeah, and I
And
guess I also wanted to say, talking about the karst, like I wish more of the permaculture literature took karst into consideration, because that's the thing. It's like that I discover for myself, because so much of the permaculture literature is about like, if you soak water in, assuming that it'll only move slowly through the landscape once it's, as long as it doesn't run off if it's soaked in. But in my
mm,
situation, depending on the layer of rock underneath, and that happened when, I back over 10 years ago now, you know, dug out a dug out a swale, like based on inspiration of somebody who was in the Ozarks, but a different area, I think, where the bedrock was a bit more solid, who'd like, dug these swales and kind of recharged and got a stream to flow much more of the time. And then, I did this, it was, a few feet deep. And then the, we got a whole bunch of rain that spring, enough to fill it up. So it's full one day. Next day, nothing in it except for a few puddles. Realized like, okay, that's all just going down out of reach of the plants. I mean, ended up filling it with organic matter. I mean, cold that in as a sponge. But yeah, you can't rely on, if the water soaks in here, that it's gonna, stay put.
so, in terms of how you manage that more intensive growing space for your annual crops, what what inputs do you use, and have you managed to scale back successfully on various things that you started out thinking you had to do?
Yeah, so again, I got to try to balance it balance growing what people want, and versus trying to do fewer inputs. So, and the inputs that we have, because we have inputs from the farm too. I mean, because we have a lot of people, we get a lot of compost generation. And so yeah, we get a lot of compost from that. We also get some of it from animal manures from the animals we have. And so, I like those sorts of inputs when I can. I
Mm,
mean, so the input, so water is a significant input, some years more than others. I mean, it really varies. Some years the water is Some years there's enough rain that we don't have to do that much watering, but other years, with the way that our soil drains, have to do a significant amount. And there is plenty of water underneath the ground if you go far enough down. But I mean, our well is several hundred feet deep, so that involves pumping water. So what I have tried to do is do balance with, like, not when I do water deeply. I mean, that's just kind of a labor saving thing too, and just getting healthy, strong plants to put the roots down, and I don't have to put the sprinklers or drip lines on as much. And so also, I also try to balance, like, not having the plants too close, but I don't want to, because sometimes it's super wet and lush. I don't want to like space them too far. I mean, I know I've read strategies about like having know or fewer irrigation by author Steve Solomon, which are
Hmm.
interesting.
Mm.
But also, he's in a climate where it's like a reliable rainy and dry season more. And for me, it's like it can just, I mean, there are certain times of year which tend to get a bit more rain than others, like the spring tends to get the most, but it can rain hard any time of year. And it can get, especially when it's hot in the summer, it can get dry quickly too. So
Do
that's
you
what I'm
find
saying.
growing,
So
oh, sorry, do you find growing diverse populations makes it easier to experiment with gradually reducing inputs? Like if you've got a diverse watermelon patch and you just delay watering it, it's a way of gradually rewarding the ones that can perform with less irrigation.
yeah, I have done that, and to a certain extent, I'm always nervous because it's like people, expect the crops. So, like, it just gets to a point where it's just like, okay, don't, if I want to still have a decent crop, now I got to do it. But
Mm,
I do definitely stress stuff out a bit. I don't try to provide, super ideal conditions that way, and hopefully over time that'll select for the ones that can take that a bit more. So yeah, that's about water. So about other inputs. So I direct seed more, I think, than most people do. I do have a small greenhouse, it was been been here. The small one that I use for seed starting has been here since before I got here, although I had just a little tunnel and I've had to redo it. I try to like do a lot of stuff direct seeded and just do the things that benefit the most from that. And then even some of them, I'm hoping to like, try experiment with some direct seeded tomatoes and peppers. Not all of them next year, but like a certain amount. They'll be later to come in, but we have a long enough season that we'll still get a good amount. For the warm season crops, we have a pretty long season. It's the cool season crops actually that we have trouble with shorter seasons for, because the ones that don't like the heat of the summer but can't take the cold of the winter too, and we
mm.
gotta get them to do the majority of their growth in those narrow windows of the spring and the fall when the weather's more to their liking. But so yeah, I
Do you
do.
reckon that breeding your crops helps with making them more adapted to direct seeding? Both in terms of like having lots of your own diverse seed that you can afford to like take chances with, and that they go through a selection process that the seedlings that manage to establish from direct seeding are the ones that dominate.
Yeah, I mean, in general, my saved seeds, if when I do have bought seeds that plant near them, I mean, I've seen a few exceptions, but most of the time they have better germination in the conditions because I've been adapting them to those conditions. But I haven't done direct seeded with like tomatoes and peppers, so that'll be an experiment with them. But I do have a bunch of seed that I've saved, so yeah, I have extra seed to spare,
Mm.
and if I can
Yeah,
try some of them. But
having that surplus seed material to take risks with is, I think, an underappreciated benefit when you start saving your own seed. And then if it's got the diversity in it, there's that opportunity for something surprising to come out of the mix.
yeah, I've definitely taken advantage of that with like just planting stuff a little early and just being like, okay, whatever can take the soil a little bit cooler can will come up, and then if I need to, I'll replant the if I don't get enough to fill in the row, I'll replant more. But I've definitely done that to a certain extent, and noticed things that again, that even with just a few generations, I feel like how getting better generation germination with my seeds than bought ones.
Now, we have to leave plenty of time to talk about your really valuable perspective on this problem of social network building amongst breeders and growers and, the broader community. But so do you want to tell us more about the situation you're in and how you kind of came to be in this intentional community?
Well, I guess for me, yeah, yeah, how I came to community. I mean, it was kind of more. I'm trying to remember when I first learned of communities, because it was definitely in kind of the phase of like where I was learning about permaculture and this stuff, and I think that kind of led to learning because there's a decent amount of connections between those worlds. These communities existed, and going around visiting a few of them and eventually ending up living here. And I mean, I was definitely there's other advantages of community too, and disadvantages. There's both. It's not for everybody, but like, I mean, just finding a place that I could do, I didn't know exactly what how it would end up, but I knew I wanted to be working with the land and doing having that be a big part of my life, and just realizing that this sort of situation, I mean, Eastwood in particular, it's like, yeah, I do have to do a modest amount of work for the business, this main business that supports the community, the nut butter business, which means we have a little factory there and going up and doing some stuff there occasionally. But I can spend most of my time doing the sort of projects that I want to do, and didn't have to like spend a whole bunch of time working for the man to just like be able to afford getting the chance to do any of this. So it ended up being something that worked very well with other stuff I wanted to do. And
Can you tell us a
yeah, I
little
mean,
bit
people
about
come
the
to the
hit?
community. Oh, what?
Oh no, sorry, you go.
People come to the community for different reasons. I mean, some are more like into the social parts of it or political things or whatever, that attract them to community. I guess just, yeah, for me, it was mainly like, wanting to have a relationship with the land. And it was kind of the path that opened up and led me to be able to, do that since, I got to East. I I first came to Eastwind when I was 22, and I was able to, like, a year later than that, basically, take the opportunity opened up to take on garden management with the team of a couple other people at the time. And so, just been able to spend most of my adult life doing sort of things that I want to do. I mean, there's definitely its challenges that go with the social and work environment too, which we can get into. But
Mm.
all in all, it's a good deal compared to a lot of other situations out there.
One thing I did want to quickly divert onto, I've heard a lot of podcasts where like commercial market farmers who sold to like wholesalers transitioned to doing their own direct sales to customers, and all of the rewards, like knowing the people that were buying their produce. But your situation almost takes that to another level because you're producing food embedded in a community of people that you like, it's not even necessarily a financial transaction that ties you together anymore. Do you have any further thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I have spent, I guess you're saying contrast it to the market farm perspective, because I have spent some brief times on a few different market farms. So, just, like a few weeks to a month, couple months here and there in a few places. So got to see a little bit of how that works. And definitely, they gotta, it's, it's a challenging world. I mean, I feel like because it's just, a niche market, because, so much of people the majority of food people buy is through the industrial system, so there's only so much market out there for these people doing on a small scale. So I and like you were saying before, just additional demands. I mean, there's definitely here, so people want to eat some things over others, but people, I'm sure it's more flexible. I don't have to spend as much time making the stuff super presentable. And I still do some, like just like especially like root vegetables and stuff, wash off the carrots before I put them, in a walk-in cooler for the for cooks to use, and because just makes more likely to want people to want to use them. So you do some of that, but compared to what market farmers have to do to make their stuff presentable, there's a lot less of that sort of labor, and don't have to do a whole marketing stuff. Can concentrate more on growing and producing the stuff. So there's a lot of advantages. I mean, people come here for different reasons, and not some people value it more than others, I'd say, but I mean, overall, there's definitely, more people who value, good homegrown food than, on any average situation out there, but it still varies within the community.
You did mention too that the corn that you're growing is turned into tortillas. And I'm someone that's been growing my own, I think it's a dent corn for years now. That's how culturally isolated I am here that I'm still not entirely sure of the different varieties of corn. I've been growing it for years, and I've kind of struggled to learn how to adapt that crop to my kitchen. It's a slow process because I'm very culturally isolated, and nobody really, there is no culture of using corn as a staple crop here other than like buying a packet of chips from the
Huh.
supermarket. And I'm really curious about how the community figured out how to use that staple crop and actually make it a regular food for everyone to share.
Well, I mean, we've kind of just over time gotten better at it. I mean, because I've been growing that corn for a while and I experimented with making tortillas and just, but then and we also have gotten, some equipment like, the grinding in particular. We For the amount we were doing, it's like, I mean, we were doing it with hand grinder for a bit. It was only, occasional batches here and there that compared to what people could go through wasn't that much because so we ended up getting, a powered grinder for that step of the process. And but I mean, yeah, we do some other stuff with it too. But yeah, the tortillas are one of the major things. I make them sometimes. There's a few other people that know how to make them and we'll make them. We don't always have them around. Sometimes in the winter time, I'll just make big batches and freeze a bunch though, just so I can take those out at times when, nobody's making them. And I don't really personally make them during the summertime because the growing season as a whole too much because just busy with other stuff. But like,
Well, it
yeah,
it
so
it ties
even
back
down the
to that.
nixtamalization.
Yeah, nixtamalization's amazing.
Yeah, so I mean, what I've gotten used to doing it with is pickling lime. I mean, I've experimented with doing it with ash, and it's definitely it works. You have to use more of it, and it makes it taste kind of ash like. And so,
Mm.
people, I feel like the lime is just more of a neutral taste that we tend to like better. But if we didn't have access to that, we could do it with ash on hand. But I do just boil it, and I've kind of adapted it to. I mean, I got the original recipe, but based on my experience and inputs from somebody else who had done some of it before coming here too, like to just kind of increase the amount of lime and increase the time it boils for, and increase the time it sits to make it easier to process too. I
Mm.
mean, that really varies depending on your type of corn. And so, I think just experimenting with different times for those steps to process and different amounts of lime is just makes sense because your corn might behave differently that way than mine. And but it's something I really like. I mean, often my breakfast is like, a couple of tortillas, a couple of eggs from the farm too here, and then like
It,
and
it,
sometimes some veggies fried up with that too. And I mean,
well,
also I can't. What?
oh no, sorry, I was just going to say before I forget, it ties back to that original idea that right now you're not growing all of the staple crops for the community because but you are developing the genetics and the cultural practices that could in principle scale in the future if it was needed. And I just
Yeah,
wanted to point out that the cultural technology to use a lot of staple crops has a similar kind of problem. Like if like me, if you just gave some random person a bucket of flint corn and said, eat it, they wouldn't know what to do. Like they could starve if they actually figured out how to process it into food. And the storage and the tools and techniques and even the culinary expectations about yes, this is what it's supposed to taste like and it is good for you. They're all things that can exist in a kind of dormant, small scale in the world today, waiting to expand if they're needed in the future.
yeah, definitely think because I met some of my early years here. I definitely had more idealism of like, just how much the just our food production would expand over the course of time, and a lot of that hasn't been realized just because of like, the amount of labor just is inconsistent, and you have to just work with a lot of new people who don't necessarily have that much experience and stuff, and so. that part could be frustrating. So like, but then I mean, I did get kind of more into that mindset of like, okay, even if we're not doing as much of it as I would like, we could still like be doing some of a lot of these things to just yeah, have that knowledge and have those seeds.
Are there any general lessons from the success of your intentional community that other people hoping to build other kinds of groups or networks in this, field of breeding and growing and working together? Are there basic principles that people can at least take into consideration when they're trying to build new organizations? I mean, like one specific thing possibly would be recruitment. Like when new people come into your community, how is that process managed so that the whole community benefits and endures?
Well, so somebody looking to join has to, I mean, contact the community and get on a 3-week visitor period, which we have one each month of the year from March through November. And then, like, if you get through your 3 weeks, and I mean, if there is a certain percentage of people that don't want somebody to be able to be a member, they put in what's called a concern. And if it's more than like 15% of the membership of the community, then the person can't become a provisional member. But if you get through your visitor period and don't have those concerns, then you have a year-long provisional membership period. And there's a vote. Well, there's actually a vote at 6 months, and then there's a vote at a year too. So it's just like, a chance to get to know somebody more. It's much harder for people to like hold in problems for that long compared to a shorter amount of time. So
Hmm.
I mean, still sometimes people can, but sometimes you don't really see something about somebody until, after they've become a full member. But mostly, yeah, that kind of gradual process where you to get to know somebody
And
is the
I'm
way to
I'm
do that.
guessing I'm guessing if that's done well, then there's less need for like, I mean, what would you call it? Like policing or authority or excluding people in extreme situations if they're really not compatible with the community.
Yeah, I mean, so people can, sometimes certain amount of visitors get it's yeah, it's easier to kick visitor out than a original member, and easier original member, a full member. It's very hard to expel a full member, although it can happen.
Mm,
It's but generally people have to do something pretty extreme. You have to get if you have to get 2/3 of full members to agree to expel a full member, and yeah, that happens. Enough people are reluctant to do that because they it has to get pretty extreme at that point. But like at the earlier points, it's less. There's I mean, it really kind of depends on the mood of the community at the time too. I
mm,
mean, communities like more general, like more selective now overall than it was, the first few years I was there. But it's also gone the other way around too. It's like more people, more visitors who come with exploring, possibly wanting to stay, end up like deciding to leave real soon, that it's just not their thing.
mm.
So, which is good. It's not for everybody. And, if people realize that early on, then, hopefully it'll be best for both of us. They'll find something else that's better for them, and we won't have to deal with the person who isn't really the right fit. So,
Do you think scale matters, like in terms of the size of the community?
yeah, I mean, I've been to communities at different scales, not really bigger than here, but a lot of ones smaller, and there's a lot of differences at the different sizes. I mean, even within like different population sizes, I've seen variation here. Yeah, just these different dynamics. Like smaller communities, I've been to some of them, and like remember doing some interesting things. Actually, in some ways can be more socially intense though, because like
Mm,
you're with the same small group of people generally, in a smaller amount of space. And here, I mean, you're seeing people a lot, although we all have our personal space, generally mostly pretty small spaces to go to, but we all have either rooms in a residence building, or like some of us like myself have a personal shelter, we call it, which basically, well, the word now is tiny house, but like so that's kind of separate away from stuff. But then we have a lot of shared facilities too, so we have that mix of both. And what was I going to say? So I mean, at the group this big, you're not going to get along perfectly with everybody by any means. But I mean, as long as you can like tolerate being in the same room with them, it's going to be fine. You have other people for your social life. And
They
so,
kind of buffer out the
but
dynamic.
yeah, but if you're at a place that only has like 8 or 10 people and there's the same sort of dynamic between two people that, just aren't don't really get along that well, that can be more of a big deal. So I mean, they have to be kind of, more selective that way, just because of that. Just they're often looking for more specific sorts of people. I mean, Eastwind is a lot of people are here for different reasons. I mean, there's certain types of people that aren't attracted to a place like this. I mean, people who like gathering their personal wealth as their main goal in their life and stuff like that. But I mean, there's still room for a lot of different people, and it's both a strength, and it's like something that causes conflict, drama too, because people are trying to pull the community in different ways. But it's also
Mm.
one of the reasons, I have been able to make it my home and stay here as long as I have, because it's kind of there's more room for different people. And it just I've been to
Now,
some places where it's like they're doing cool stuff, and I had a good visit. But I knew I could never make the place into my home because they
mm.
were just looking for somebody that was more a specific fit for that group, and that wasn't me. So yeah,
Do,
there's
do you have any sense about why? So, for historical context, a lot of intentional communities started around the same time Eastwind did in the 70s, but many of them didn't last very long. Do you have any sense about what were the factors that made Eastwind survive when others didn't?
well, I think a lot of the communities of that era were like just you know very idealistic. And I mean, Eastland was too, but it also had enough, had some structure to start. And like I think a lot of communities that era were more just like, oh, let's just live together on this land, and we'll make it work. And then conflict came up and they don't really have a way to deal with it, or they don't the systems in place. And I mean, Eastwind, so I mean, one of the main reasons that Eastwind made it was Kat Kincaid. She was one of the founders in the founding group, and she had helped start another community before that, and then was just like wanting to make more, and so hooked up with a group that was starting Eastwind. And I guess the rest of the group was like pretty much all in their early 20s, and Kat Kincaid was like 40, and she had this experience and like had started another community even. And so, and she didn't, I think she only stuck around for a few years, and then that left and eventually ended up starting another one later. But anyway,
Interesting.
that so there's that experience, and there was an income source for the community too, like that got pretty early on. It was actually making hammocks in conjunction with Twin Community, the other community that Kat Kincaid had started before, and like they had extra business and got Eastwind into it. I mean, the hammocks and it was a major thing for several decades, but ended before my time. But by then, the nut butters had built up to be a main thing. So there's that, and there is also that it started with a group, and the group kind of got into it together. It was always a group project. The community owned the land. I've definitely seen a number of like forming communities out there that are just like either a person or family unit that started a place and has this idea of like, oh, let's get more people out here and we'll become a community. And so often that doesn't actually, that nobody else can really make it their home because there's just a power differential between the founders and other people. And I think generally there's good intentions that way. I mean, some
Mm,
people like, oh, they're just trying to exploit free labor. And I've seen enough of the situations I've seen. I don't think that was the intention, but I think, they thought in their head that just like, oh, if we have more people here doing, the same things we're doing, how great this would be. But then other people come and they invariably, want to do some things differently and like that. And then there just gets to be this thing between the founder, they're the people that put everything they had into getting this place going. And there's never going to be an equal power dynamic that way. So I've seen that with some of the places that never really amounted to much of anything. If you go on IC.org, the Federation for Intentional Communities website, there are a lot of different communities listed out there, and there's a lot of different types. And so, but yeah, there are quite a few forming communities that are kind of in that boat too.
I'm gonna have
So
to follow this thread because I mean the United States is such an interesting experimental hotbed of these kind of structures, these social structures. So you've got me really interested, and I'm gonna have to follow that up. We're probably gonna have to hit the final wrap up questions. So, but I don't know. I could talk. So many of my guests I could talk to for hours. This is wonderful, but we have to try and keep it at some kind of bounds. But for the final questions, what is your vision for the future of food in your community?
let's see. Well, I think just, trying to do more of what I've already been doing, reduce inputs and adapt, keep on adapting stuff to the climate and, hopefully be able to work with more crops, including, more perennial crops too. I mean, definitely like the permaculture, ideals of more perennial crops, but then there's also more challenges. I feel like all the permaculture literature, doesn't necessarily recognize all the advantages the annuals have in certain situations too, as far as just having much more generations that you can work with. And
Mm,
also, I mean, because of this instability in the world, like whether it be climatic or political or whatever, having something that you could, if you have to pick up and move, you could take them with you. That is a big bonus with the annuals. So it's
mm.
like, I on one hand, I like seeing increasing perennials, and maybe someday, if there's ever a time when the world is like more stable for longer term, then maybe a more perennial focused agriculture will develop. But I also think with the nature of how a lot of things are in the world now, having things that can be can change and adapt more quickly and can be moved around more easily, is having those annuals will continue to be a very major part of any functional agricultural system. So yeah, I mean, of course, animal systems too. I mean, I haven't talked much about it because that's not what I'm personally doing, but I mean, I think, regenerative animal systems are great, and and breeding and adapting those makes a lot of sense too. Of course, that's harder to do, especially with larger animals, unless you have a whole lot of land, enough to have a very large population, because I can, have thousand a thousand corn plants and not too big of an area, but to have 1,000 cows, you need a huge spread of pasture land.
Mm.
And so, you know, yeah, you see,
I
I really liked like your, uh, your article on dogs a while back, because we have a lot of dogs here, but they aren't really that well integrated into the, agricultural systems. So, I mean, just to see those connections more between things, like, yeah, if we have of more of these things interrelated and helping each other out rather than just being looked at in isolation. But a lot of that just involves not just skill and experience, just a particular way of thinking about things, but then
mm.
it also has to be a way of thinking about things that is actually, manifested in reality, where, a lot of not just, talked about, oh, this would be great to do this.
Well, a lot of our options for different ways of managing animals these days are impossible because there's cars zooming down roads everywhere. And if your
Yeah,
animal accidentally wanders out there and causes an accident, it can be, it can be a life ruining disaster for both the people in the car and for you in this
yeah,
current environment where everyone gets sued over everything.
yeah.
Another important question, who do you think I should interview next, particularly if you have any insights into the intentional communities?
Well, and there's somebody else breeding crops in an intentional community, which his name's Edmund Frost. I mean, I've met him briefly and had some correspondence. Actually, sent some seeds with him this year. Like, and so yeah, he's out at Twin Oaks Community in Virginia, and he is has small business Commonwealth seed that is, a lot of stuff he's done as well as certain other people that he works with. So, that's a possibility. I mean, he mentioned the Ken Asmus of Oikos tree crops that, that just seems like has a very similar philosophy of as the landrace gardening community. I mean, Carol Depp was one of the first, like, my first inspirations for saving seed and breeding. So
I
I've
would love
just
to
been
talk
doing
to her.
that.
Is she still around?
I assume so. I mean, I haven't looked at her website. I got some seeds from her a while back, but they didn't do too well here because she's on the West Coast in
Hmm.
Oregon in a very different climate. So, I kind of haven't tried. I think
I'm gonna have to
I
track
haven't
her
looked
down.
for a
I'm
while.
moving her to the top of my list.
So there's also Matthew and Nancy Cost that run the Buffalo Seed Company, which I told you that they're selling some of my seeds. I mean,
Hmm.
they've just been doing it for like 5 or 6 years. It's a little small operation, but they're really into the, landrace breeding sort of thing. And, in fact, I found out about them through Joseph Lofthouse's website.
Mm.
So,
As somebody who's helping coordinate the sale and distribution of smaller producers' seed, they'll be high on my list too. So those are some really good suggestions. So
cool.
how can people learn more about your work and maybe get in touch?
Well, I mean, yeah, I guess to learn more about my work and get in touch. I mean, I can, yeah, if anybody's interested in getting in touch with me, I could give my email, and I mean, I guess if it right here, I mean, it's just o, Ozark Permaculture at protonmail.com. I mean, if you're interested in Eastwind and learning more about that, you can just look at eastwind.org as a website. And I mean, I haven't like I sometimes post stuff on various forums and stuff, but not really all that often. I guess, I've always thought maybe someday of writing down more of what I'm doing, but, haven't written a lot of that down. So,
Well, it's actually a question that I wanted to ask before, and I will make time for it here. So you're kind of the head gardener in your community. Do you have any thoughts on succession of and resilience? Like if you were like ill for a couple of years and somebody had to step in, or eventually when you have to hand the role to someone else, do you have any thoughts about how that could be managed?
yeah, well, I mean, I've been trying to train people for a long time, and a certain amount of people do some other important roles. But the thing is, with the amount of turnover here, it's I have definitely trained a lot of people who end up leaving, and so it's a tricky situation because that is very much on my mind. Like for anything, whether even with me still doing it, I want to be able to spread this and to teach stuff to people. But it is easy to get burnt out too with like
Mm,
especially with people who come in and don't know much of anything. It's like I love having the kind of conversations we're having, but when it's like the conversations with people who know absolutely nothing about gardening, that it's just like that get those sort of ones get old after a bit, especially when like a good portion of them aren't really going to end up doing that much with it. But I mean, experience. So a lot of it I feel like is just a matter of motivation and energy drive. I mean, people can come without much experience at all. And like there was one person, this is who came back in 2016 and she was like in her early 20s and didn't have much experience with gardening, but she ended up staying for I think 3 years and by the third year was helping me co-manage the garden and was really good at it because you know he was just interested enough and had enough of that motivation to on doing it. But then, unfortunately, she left. Like, I mean, often happens here. People move on and do other things. I mean, place is really often a lot what you make of it. I mean, people can come and just learn a lot of skills and do a bunch of stuff, or you can come and just do easy work and not really learn much and just scrape by. So I mean,
I
everybody's got to work for the community, but whether you actually are doing something that builds up a knowledge base is, your own decision.
yeah.
So
I guess it's like
like,
a case where you have to sow a lot of seeds to get one fruit.
yeah, so I mean, I definitely feel like I've had an impact on a number of people that way, whether it's a small or a large one, whether it's people who just come and briefly see it or people who participate for a significant amount of time. But, I mean, yeah, my dream, 10, 15 years ago was more like, okay, once I've been doing it a bit, there'll be like, a number of other people who, are on a similar level, have been, trained and are motivated and interested that much. And I mean, there's definitely some people who get to a certain level that way, but it is that has the people aspect of all this is some of the most difficult, challenging of any of it.
Mm,
So,
mm.
and I think, yeah, a lot of it is just like what motivates. I mean, what just is it just that most people aren't super motivated because people are used to, a life in plentiful times where they've never had to worry about, being short of food? Is it going to take till something really nasty happens until people get more serious? I don't know, but
That's the position I'm taking, that we're us weirdo, plant people on the fringes are in reserve, waiting for the circumstances to change when more people want to get involved, when they have a real motivation to take what we're doing
yeah,
seriously, and we just have to kind of reach out and talk to each other and continue the conversation until everyone else gets the message.
yeah,
So what is
that's a
your
good
final
mindset.
Oh, sorry, after you.
Oh, I was just saying, I think that's a good mindset. I mean, I think a lot of people come here, especially if they come here young to Eastwind, with more idealism about stuff. And if you got to make it work, if you're going to make it work long term, you got to be more realistic about it. I mean, not saying to get rid of all your idealism, but can still, you got to just, realize that the reality of the situation and work, with how people are and how the situation actually is, and see that things are far from perfect, but it's still a pretty good deal in a lot of ways, and you can do a lot of stuff if you focus on that and don't dwell on the negative stuff too much.
And share watermelon with people every summer
Yeah.
to just give them a hint about the potential. What is your final message for people who are thinking of getting into this style of local agriculture or community?
Well, I mean, for community in particular, I'd say, go check out community. I mean, check out, if you can, check out multiple ones of different types you see, because there are differences, between them. But I mean, maybe even if you check out one and if it's like decide you want to be there, that's cool too. But I mean, also just like, you know, you don't, you're not going to, you're going to know more and more about just things you don't notice at first right off the bat. Like, I mean, some people come in with the attitude sometimes of like, have no experience actually in community and like, why aren't you all like this, and this? And just like, okay, spend some time, see how things are. And, some of those, I mean, asking the questions is great. I don't mind asking people questions. It's just kind of like just the attitude. And when people have the attitude of like, that have no experience with this sort of thing and then are just like, I know what you all should be doing, that's not very helpful. But as far as I mean, yeah, there's a lot I could say about that, about the sorts of communities there, for work great for some people, the people struggle, and different communities are better for different people. And yeah, as far as the sort of agriculture, of course, my situation is different than the vast majority of people who are getting into this either on just a home scale or a market scale. So, I mean, but just definitely the land race, definitely the land race principles. I mean, you get read Joseph Lofthouse's book, like I read it through it in like an afternoon when I got it, and it's just it's really helped me, even though my climate environment's pretty different from where his is, and have different challenges, and like, but doing it's really added stuff to, because there was definitely a time in there once I've been doing this for a bit. here, and it's just like, okay, I'm just kind of doing the same thing year after year, growing. I mean, trying a few new varieties, mostly just growing the same new varieties, and like kind of save saving seeds makes growing annuals more into something like watching a tree grow, or it's something builds year
Mm.
after year.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, you're doing the same things in one sense, but your project, your as a whole is growing, evolving, and changing each year. So it doesn't get to be just the same old tired rhythm of planting the same seeds from the same company and growing them out over and over again. Kind of you're building, you're building onto something.
Mm. Well, on that hopeful and inspiring note, thank you, Richard, for chatting to me and the audience, and thank you very much for taking the time.
You're welcome. Thank you for hosting.
The Zero Input Agriculture podcast is a solo passion project built with my ample time and meagre resources. If you would like to support the show, then sign up for a paid subscription to my Zero Input Agriculture blog at Substack. As a reward, you can read all my past posts and listen to the audiobook of Taming the Apocalypse. If you prefer reading about the past and future of biological technology, you can read the ebook of Taming the Apocalypse through Amazon. And finally, please rate and review the show on whatever podcast app you use, since it helps other people find me. Or recommend the show directly to anyone who could use some inspiration to become a plant breeder themselves.